Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for listening, having us here to listen to our story. Through the disclaimer, please. That's good, thanks. So what we have is, what we are chasing or aiming to prove up this year is the world's largest primary, that is not associated with hydrocarbons, helium field. Next slide. So a little bit of education, because helium is, and a lot of people, including myself a few years ago, thought of helium as a party balloon filler. It's actually a critical raw material. Between its use in the manufacture of semiconductors and fibre optic cables, it actually underpins the entire global telecommunication system. The use in semiconductors really came about through the adoption of smartphones and small chips in our phones and TVs and computers and cars and everything now. It's also essential for MRI machines. Next slide. So it's not massive compared to natural gas, but it's a very substantial industry and certainly large enough to absorb what we're doing. Around $5 billion annually this year, a wholesale market, and growing at a high rate because of its uptake and the use of in semiconductors. Next slide. So the supply chain for helium, traditionally the US supplied 100% of the world's helium. In the last 20 or so years, as the US has depleted, and particularly the US Federal Reserve has depleted, now fully depleted, you've got countries such as Qatar, Russia and Algeria have come on stream producing helium from large natural gas fields. So by the middle of this decade, between those three countries, they'll supply 60 to 70% of the world's helium. We felt that was a little bit, the geopolitical risk was a little bit, needed some diversification. And what we have is a project that's capable of diversifying and securing the global helium supply chain. Next slide. And it's an incredibly valuable resource. So this is the price of helium as the US Federal Reserve depleted in 2019. It's basically completely out. But in the last 10 years, helium's quadrupled in price. That's about 50 times the price of LNG from a very similar cost base per 1,000 cubic feet to find and develop it. So, and what we're targeting now at that price, this is a long-term bulk helium supply contract with like a Linde or an Air Products or Air Liquide. What we're targeting in our first two wells, which are upcoming next quarter, is about $7.5 billion in the ground. Next slide. Thanks. So the guys behind it, so myself, I'll talk about Sean first. Sean's our exec chair. Sean, many of you may know him. He ran Arrow Energy, took it from a $20 million startup and was one of the, or if not the father of the coal seam gas to LNG industry in Queensland, and sold Arrow to Shell PetroChina for $3.5 billion. Fantastic guy to have running or heading up Nobel Helium. Myself, I'm a geophysicist by background, but I've been involved in oil and gas exploration all over the planet, run projects, and I guess the value add that I have here and the reason I founded this is because I was involved with Hardman Resources and was a key player in the first oil discoveries in the East African Rift back in 2006. All the knowledge and billions of dollars that have been invested in the East African Rift since, and 4 billion barrels of oil, we're taking all of that knowledge and applying it just a little bit further south in the rift system for helium. Next slide. Some of you guys might know this gentleman, a guy named Kent Masters. He's currently the CEO, chairman of Albemarle, the world's largest lithium producer. Kent was actually one of the executive directors of Linde, and Kent came on board as our anchor investor a few years ago. I still speak with Kent very regularly. He's very excited about where we're up to. We have a very strong board. I won't go into the details because we're short on time, but extremely capable, high quality team. Very proud of it. And we're also working with, next slide, we're also working with Professors John Gluyas and Chris Ballantyne at Oxford University, two of the world's leading helium geoscientists. They built an atlas for us so we could understand the relative prospectivity of Tanzania, where we are. I'll tell you about that in a second, for helium, and also we're looking, in the future we may want to diversify and look at other parts of the world. But critically, we've got the intellectual firepower of the world's leading helium geoscientists on the team. Next project. Next slide, sorry. So these are our 4 project license areas, 4 rift basins in Tanzania. Tanzania's got a very unique geology where The helium is produced as a radioactive byproduct of uranium, which over 2 to 3 billion years in the Tanzanian Craton has built up quite an inventory of helium in the subsurface. That system is now being actively rifted and heated and fractured and torn apart and releasing those billions of years worth of helium from the crystal lattice. That's what makes it so unique. There's no other system like this on the planet, and we're seeing helium at surface around up to 18% coming out of the ground in hot springs. Now, the commercial cutoff for helium in the US in the national gas field is 0.3%, so it's phenomenally high grade. Chris Ballantyne calls this helium release on steroids. The exciting bit, next slide, is we're drilling our first two holes next quarter. So drilling, targeting Mbelele and Pigeri, combined unrisked resource of 16.5 billion cubic feet of helium. That's about 10% of our portfolio of 176 billion cubic feet, which for reference, it's about 30 years supply. $7.5 billion in the ground just for those two, our first two targets up there in the northwestern part of our licence area. We've done a lot of de-risking in the last year or several years. Airborne gravity gradiometry, soil gas surveys, seismic, 3D, just completed our 3D seismic program, and now we're ready to drill. Next slide. So we've literally spent 7 years getting to this point. So next quarter, we'll find out what we actually have. But this is a three-dimensional schematic of what we're targeting. These two wells you can see at surface. That's collectively 16.5 billion cubic feet. I guess the reason we've targeted this particular play type is it's the play type that we devised at Hardman to test the oil and gas system up in Uganda. They were the first two oil discoveries in Uganda. We were bought for $1.5 billion by Tullow Oil, and then they went on to drill another 12 of these, and they've had 12 discoveries, so 14 discoveries. This play type has a 100% success rate. We know that this is a very effective trapping system, and we know that we've got helium coming out of the ground coincident with our structures, which is what those yellow dots are. That's helium anomalies above background. We've secured our rig, and that's targeting $7.5 billion in the ground. And we've just completed, before we move on, and immediately to the south is another structure that we're just working up to mature status, and that's another $10.5 billion worth of helium in the ground. Next slide. We've just announced that we've got our preferred bidder for a farm-out process. The ASX pushed us to announce the terms. $20 million well cover, so we're funded for the wells, and $5 million US back costs. So we're aiming to get that completed in the next few weeks to meet our drilling timeframe. Next slide. So what we're targeting here is what we're planning on opening here is another what's called a string of pearls. So that particular play type has 100% against the basin, edge of the basin, has a 100% success rate. We've got, for analogy here, we've got the South Lokachaar Basin in Kenya. That was one of the other basins that's been explored. 100% success rate there. We've got these string of pearls on both sides of our basins. So we've got a lot of running room yet to do. Next slide. If we're successful, we've got Blacktop Road all the way back to Dar es Salaam for export of liquid helium. We've got we're in the national grid, so we've got access to power, and we're right next to a lake. So there's no shortage of power, water, and infrastructure to produce this thing. Next slide. If we hit our nameplate of 850 million cubic feet per annum, which is it's a bit less than about 10% of the world's helium supply by that stage. This is primary helium, not associated with hydrocarbons, and the midstream guys are biting our hand off to get hold of this because it's nirvana for them. We'd have to invest about $300 million US to build a plant capable of doing that, and we think the reservoirs are capable, the fields and reservoirs are capable of producing that without too much trouble. CapEx, an OpEx of $25 million at $450 million US per 1,000 cubic feet. You probably can't read the fine print there, but basically paybacks in about 9 months. Next slide. So we're currently sitting around 50 million Australian dollar market cap. We listed in April last year. Obviously, we're now starting, as we get closer to the drilling program in the third quarter, we're starting to see some appreciation in our share price and appreciation, I hope, for all the hard work that we've been doing. So Helium is very unique. I encourage everybody to take a look at it. Get some exposure to it.